So after a long and checkered history of owning cars, I strangely became a Mercedes man. My track car / weekender is the SLK350, and my daily driver is the C450 AMG, a near twin of the C43 that Mercedes currently makes. What do these two cars say about the roughly 15 years between the dates they were made? And what do they say about how far Mercedes has come in their journey of making great automobiles? I'll explore those questions in this episode of Between the Wheels. Over 100 years of automotive development is pretty impressive. Mercedes was born as Benz, Daimler, Maybach, and Jelinek were all working on their individual and collective ideas of what transport should be. After Gottlieb Daimler graduated from school at the end of the 1850s, he worked as a draftsman and a workshop inspector, meeting Wilhelm Maybach in 1865. Almost 20 years later, they would co-develop a four-stroke internal combustion engine known as the grandfather clock. Because of its low weight and compact design, the breakthrough of mounting it inside a vehicle was made possible. Health issues, funding shortages, and enough infighting between ownership interests to equal any modern-day corporate scandal ensued. By the end of the 1800s, Maybach and Daimler had achieved real breakthroughs in their pursuit of innovative engine design. Meanwhile, in Mannheim, Carl Benz was developing two-stroke technology as he pursued his dream of building an engine without horses. His work progressed for nearly 10 years, and on New Year's Eve, 1879, he got his engine running for the very first time. Benz, too, experienced his share of on-again, off-again partnerships and financing troubles, but he remained committed to his focus of developing vehicle technology. On January 29, 1886, Carl Benz, heavily influenced by the parallel work streams of Daimler and Maybach, registered a patent for his vehicle with gas operation. The patent detailed the listing as Patent Motorwagen, or patent motor car, and the automobile was born. Emil Jelinek, an entrepreneur who worked with the Daimler DMG, or Daimler Motors Company, created the trademark for Mercedes in 1901 for a very special machine. With 35 horsepower, the first Mercedes, named after Jelinek's daughter, was a departure from previous vehicles and caused a stir at the Nice Race Week that same year. Jelinek went on to market the new machine to the affluent by imbuing the brand with motorsports and racing heritage, and from that start, Mercedes took off. We've come a long way in a century, from 35 horsepower cars to machines that top 1,000 horses and nearly 300 miles per hour. Mercedes is still winning races, and winning as a designer and manufacturer of passenger cars that set the pace for the industry. Within our modern cars are several hallmarks to the work done by Mercedes pioneers. Mercedes firsts, like the airbag and camera and sensor-driven autonomous technology, save lives every day. With innovations like crumple zones and automatic braking, chances are your car has more than one technology that showed up first in a Mercedes. As I enjoy my daily driver, the C450 AMG, and track my SLK350, I've been pondering why I chose them and what makes them a part of Mercedes' rich heritage. First up, the C450 AMG. As a cruiser, I've never had a better car. It's as solid as a tank, the engine has more than enough power, and the 4MATIC all-wheel drive keeps this car planted in just about any kind of road condition. As much as I liked the subtly aggressive exterior of the C450, it was the interior that really finally won me over on this car. Audi and a lot of other manufacturers are stepping up their game in terms of the quality and the look of their interiors, but it was Mercedes that put the market on notice with the C-Class a couple of years ago. They've managed to do things like quilted leather and diversity of colors and materials, switchgear that's a pleasure to interface with, and all that adds up to S-Class finery in a C-Class price. And that's pretty attractive. It's another sign that Mercedes knows what they're doing with these cars. On the outside, this car is classy muscle. Its C63 big brother looks meaner, sure, but this car does the contract killer out for a burger thing really well. I've added custom-made wheel spacers to my car, just 10 millimeters in the front and 15 in the back, since I felt the stance could be a bit more aggressive. But beyond that, and a few chrome bits that I've made dark, this car is as she was built. And from a lot of angles, it evokes that nice mix of class and menace that I was looking for. So the SLK350, my track car, can't be as comfortable to drive as the C450, right? Well, right. It's a 12-year-old car. It's a couple of generations behind the C450 in automotive development. But nonetheless, there were still a number of things aesthetically and performance-wise that won me over on this car. And one of the aesthetic reasons why I really like the SLK comes down to wiper stalks. Years ago, I had the opportunity to have some seat time in an early model Volkswagen Scirocco. For its day, it was a cool car. I enjoyed driving it, and its exterior styling was different than the American cars of the day, which were huge boats. On the inside was a different story. There were a lot of parts about the inside of that car that seemed dated. Most notably were these wiper stalks inside the old Scirocco's. They looked like melted plastic pieces coming off the steering column, straight out of 1951. A number of years later, when I was searching for the car that would become this SLK, my track car, I drove a handful of 986 Boxsters, and I noticed something familiar inside the cockpit of the Porsche Boxster. That same wiper stalk from the Scirocco. And I thought to myself, I guess Hans in the VW parts department was assigned with the job of designing the wiper stalk and just went back to the parts bin of the Scirocco, and they stuck that on the 986 and said good enough. And it kind of made me feel a little less admiration for Porsche. It felt like the inside of the early model Porsche Boxster, the 986, was sort of understyled, like they hadn't really bothered to really design the inside of that car. I've never felt that way with the SLK, and I've grown more admiration as I've gotten to know Mercedes models that they seem to spend a little more time designing both the exterior and the interiors of their cars. They feel and look premium, and it's one of the many things that's made me really admire how much Mercedes has grown after all these years. Part of Mercedes knowing how to build great cars after all these years is more than just building great engines. It's also knowing how their engines make each of their cars feel different. In the case of the C450, it's a comfortable cruiser, but also a car that has enough of the AMG lunacy to have true brute force shock and awe. SLK, the experience is completely different. We still have a V6, but it delivers power in a completely different way than the C450. The name SLK suggests that Mercedes knew what they were developing when they were building it, a small, compact, lightweight sports car. When you get behind the wheel, you feel it. In the SLK, I can just drive. The combination of powerful engine with unassisted breathing, a steering rack that feels connected to the road, and a manual gearbox. Well, as I've said in previous episodes, those three reasons are why I chose this car. And that engine serving as the centerpiece for this driving experience in what is really a analog experience that isn't being made anymore. Well, the engine, again, defines the personality of this car. And it's another demonstration that Mercedes knows what they're doing with the engines they build, not just for their own cars, but high-performance makes like Pagani and other supercars. The SLK is purpose-built for driving, and Mercedes clearly had a plan for what kind of identity this car should have. And that's true of the C450 as well. You get a sense that Mercedes knows exactly what they want this car to be. And that is a controversial subject, because this car was the only one built in the AMG Sport line, just for 1 year before they decided to make it the C43 and give it full AMG status. And that decision had the AMG enthusiasts grabbing their pitchforks and marching down the street, because this car doesn't have the V8 or 500 horsepower or doesn't rip your face off when you drive it down the street. So is it a dilution of the brand? Does it represent a minimalization of the AMG badge on the side of the car? Well, it's a good question. I drove the C63 before I purchased this car, and I love the V8 roar. I love the steroid-injected fender flares. But this car, with nearly the same performance and all-wheel drive and a lot of the same feature set for a lower price point, fit my needs. And that shows that Mercedes, much like Audi and BMW with their M and their S Sport lines, knows what they're doing. They're filling a segment that buyers want to purchase in. That certainly worked for me. Further evidence to that fact was data that in 2017 showed that Mercedes passed BMW and Audi as the #1 luxury automaker in the world. And the projections are they're going to keep that title for the next few years. So somebody at Mercedes Benz knows what they're doing. I won't do a rant here about the top 5 things I love and hate about these cars, because this episode is really about the evolution of Mercedes, as evidenced by the 2 examples of that manufacturer that I own. But I will talk about one aspect of one of these cars that I really don't like. And since earlier I picked on turn signals, let's talk about gear stalks. I'm a sucker for a shifter in the center console. And I know, in an automatic, it doesn't really matter. The car spends most of its time in D. I realize it's petty, but I'm a car guy, and sometimes we're petty. I've actually passed on cars before simply because they have that stupid knob in the center console from shifting from P to R to D. I'm looking at you, Jaguar. So I almost passed on the C450 when I got in, and I realized the shifter is up here on the steering column. Every time I get in the car and I have to shift into drive by reaching up here, I feel like I'm 75 years old, driving my Oldsmobile 98 in the 1900s. I hate it. It made me feel a little better when I went to a Tesla driving event about a year ago and I saw that Tesla's using the same switchgear in their Model S. That's kind of cool, but I still hate it. And I get it. Mercedes had to make room in the console for things like the MMI controller and a handwriting recognition pad, which is really critical in Asian markets where there's a lot more characters, and the complexity of handwriting recognition is really made worse by complex characters in those markets. But other companies like Audi and BMW have figured out a way to put a shifter and an MMI controller in the same center console and make it all work. What's wrong with you, Mercedes? So not all is perfect in Benz world, but 100 or so years after Benz, Maybach, Jelinek, and Daimler got together, Mercedes still turns out great cars that set the pace for the rest of the industry. And that's pretty remarkable. And so are both of these cars, each in their own way, contributing to the segments they occupy. They both put a smile on my face every time I get in them. And for car enthusiasts, that's really what it's all about. As always, thanks for watching.